On a dark and stormy night, not a star was in sight. In a graveyard by a church way up on the hill. Well, the ghosts come out to play, and then I thought I heard one say, I've got you, I'll keep you, I always will.
Oh, now I got you where I want you. I'm gonna keep you where I got you. For you the one that shot my great-grandpa. I told you I would get you. Oh, if I saw you, now I got you. For you the one that stole my great-grandma.
Now on that very same night, now that old tomcat started a fight. And this is the way it all did sound to me. Now you know I couldn't stand there. I didn't like them cats, you should know that. Didn't like them ghosts either, so I looked down at my feet. I said, feet, now come on, do your duty and carry me home. But that old ghost looked up to me and said,
oh, now I got you where I want you. I'm gonna keep you where I got you. For you the one that shot my great-grandpa.
It's your home, and there's no place like Wayfair to make your reach-in closet feel like a walk-in closet. Now that's more your style. However you make it, make your home a place like no other.
I was born in Montreal, Quebec, and I left Montreal when I was very young, around 10 or 11. Moved to Toronto, lived there till I was till I was 14. Moved to Florida and lived there about 12, 13 years. About 12 years ago, I got a job in Tucson, Arizona. So I drove from Toronto to Tucson, and I was staying in my boss's house, but he wasn't there. He was in Canada. It was a condominium townhouse, you know, with an upstairs and a downstairs. My life at that time, I think, was pretty normal. I was, you know, recently divorced after 5 years of marriage, so trying to find my path alone again, you know, working and trying to make a life for myself, same like anyone else.
Be careful what you wish for. We've all heard the old adage, but how many of us have lived the results of wishing for the wrong thing? I am Lawrence Chow. Today in Ghostly Encounters, we look at the case of Brad Powell, a man carving out an ordinary life. In the midst of that, Brad will have what he thinks is a harmless, almost ordinary paranormal experience. But Brad will wish for more. And as a result, he's about to be plunged into a year-long odyssey of terror.
The second or third day, I noticed that the lights would flicker on and off. Particularly this one hallway light in the entrance to the condo. I would look back and say, oh my goodness, what the heck's going on here? The TV would flicker and terrible reception even though we had cable TV. So very often I heard popping sounds and interference with the TV and stuff like that. I suspected that there might be some sort of presence in there because I was always open to that kind of thing. So I just assumed that's exactly what it was. And then as time went on, I realized that there was much more to it than faulty electrical. So I think that was really the very beginning of it trying to attract my attention as best it could. When it really began to attract my attention, I decided maybe I'll try and communicate with this entity and get it to do things to prove that this indeed was really happening. I said, well, you know, if you're really here, why don't you move the chandelier from left to right or right to left? But it was so subtle and so gentle the way it would move the chandelier that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or not. And as the communication evolved, I became stronger and stronger. And there was an empty bag on the floor. I asked it or suggested to it, maybe if you move the plastic bag, you know, I can fully acknowledge your presence. And it did so, and the bag started to lift up and float. It seemed the more I communicated with this spirit, the more powerful or stronger it could manifest itself physically. It showed itself as a cloud, a misty form, almost like fog, with sparks shooting out of it. The cloud was maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide, maybe 4 or 5 feet high. I was fascinated by this entity, this energy. I was putting my hand in it, my fingers, to feel it, and to connect with it as well, because at this point, there was no fear. It was neat, it was cool. At that point, there was no question. There indeed was something going on in this house. Initially, when it was being nice like that, I believed it. I thought it was some kind of guardian angel or, you know, something like that. Something that was pleasant, something that was nice and nothing to be fearful of. That night I went to sleep and had a nice sleep. And it was the next day that it became very malicious and very scary. Its ultimate goal was certainly to put the fear of God in me. I was thinking when I realized that there was indeed a presence in this house that, wow, this is pretty cool, because it didn't show itself in a negative or hurtful or harmful way at all. It just seemed like a cool experience to have. And then the following day, I really knew it was there because it did everything in its power to make me very fearful. That's when this ghost started making the walls appear to be bulging in and out. I was seated sitting on the couch, around 10 feet away from the wall. There was one wall that was bulging out. And I inquired, "Is that you?" And of course it said yes. It started showing these ugly, mean, evil faces on the wall. When the faces showed up, it was more like 3D actually, but they kind of moved and there were like shadows with it. But then the faces would change a little bit. They started to become very evil-looking creatures, monsters, whatever you want to call them. Very freaky stuff, very scary. I remember thinking to myself, what am I going to do next with this situation I've gotten myself into? All kinds of things race through your mind. It was horrible. There's no question in my mind that did indeed occur. That was the beginning of an onset of total panic and fear. And the more fearful I became, the more malicious it became. It would also physically attach itself to me when I was trying to sleep. It didn't feel like an actual human hand on me when I felt its presence, but I did feel a pressure that might be the equivalent in the weight or the firmness, along with goosebumps, terrible goosebumps, and I just knew it was this thing on me, and it was a very uncomfortable, quite a horrible feeling. I actually called a friend, and she told me, you know, a couple of things like put salt around the perimeter, the inside perimeter of your house, and that helps keep them out, as well as burning sage I was recommended to do. Those things didn't seem to work. This went on in the house for about a week, but that week was a very, very long, hard week. And I got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I packed my bags and left. I had to quit my job. I hopped in my car and drove from Tucson to Florida. I felt safe in Florida because I used to live there. When I was in the car, I could feel this spirit on me, again with the goosebumps and the pressure as well. It was always there. When I went to Florida, I decided to get a job thinking that I could cope with this thing. I was actually living in a motel at the time. It had an air conditioner in the window. I barely slept the whole time I was in Fort Lauderdale. From the time I left Tucson, Arizona, I had many, many sleepless nights, paralyzed with fear under my blanket, until I would just pass out from sheer exhaustion. One night I was in the motel room. It was in the evening, around 6 o'clock. I'd just gotten home from work, and I hadn't slept in weeks. And I was so exhausted. I knew it was there, but I said, no, I just gotta pretend it's not there and doze off, because, you know, when you're in that state of mind, you need your rest. Things get worse when you're not resting properly. I was just dozing off, and I heard a popping sound in the room. It was a fairly loud popping sound. I opened my eyes, and the curtains were completely engulfed in fire and flames. It was definitely trying to kill me. I got a job in Fort Lauderdale. I was actually living in a motel at the time. And I came home from work and I was just completely exhausted. I needed to rest. This ghost followed me to Florida, Every night it was there with me when I was trying to sleep, just trying to make my hell a little bit more hellish. But I said, no, I just gotta pretend it's not there and doze off. And I heard a popping sound in the room. It was a fairly loud popping sound. I opened my eyes. The curtains were completely engulfed in fire and flames. And there was fire coming from the carpeting up the wall and up the window and the curtains and up to the ceiling. And the room was completely, instantly packed with smoke. I grabbed my things out of the room with the fire still going on. And this is all a matter of seconds. And then I ran right back in and put the fire out. Looking back, had I fallen asleep, who knows what would have happened. It would have certainly been a deep sleep. There's no question that this thing started the fire somehow. This entity was definitely trying to kill me. And at that point, I knew it was time to check out. I needed to be alone. I realized that I needed to focus all of my energy on trying to deal with this and cope with this and to get through it. And that's when I decided to go to buy a tent and a sleeping bag and go camping. I quit my job and I drove near Naples, Florida on the west coast to a state park. And I camped out in the swamps, which was very hard, very, very hard to do. Well, things changed for me because I had very little money. So my priorities changed, and that was eating, making a fire. When I was camping out, it felt like it was always very close. This ghost who constantly, persistently, dozens and dozens of times would try to attach itself to me. And sometimes it succeeded because I was still not fully understanding of how to maintain that barrier of it completely, at least physically off me, if not around me. I knew it was this energy, this entity was in complete control of what was going on. I was just completely lost. This spirit was doing everything in its power to make me go crazy, and it very nearly succeeded. I was feeling very suicidal because I was unable to cope. I was completely helpless. I couldn't reach out to anyone. I felt that my family would not understand, or my friends, what I was going through, and I chose not to tell them as a result. I didn't feel like I was an outcast from society. I was cognizant of the fact that I put myself in, I guess, a self-imposed exile but it wasn't really an exile. It was just what I needed to do to cope and get through what I was getting through. And people, under times of trauma and stress, people do different people do different things to cope, and that's what I did. Eventually, I went back to Canada, drove back to Canada, here in Toronto, and I was staying with one of my brothers on his farm. And one night I was lying in bed. And I felt this ghost once again trying to do me harm. But this night was different. I had enough and I was tired. And I yelled out, "F you, get the heck out of my life. I'm done, finished." And I was very angry. Just angry at myself and the situation and a year of torment, a year of hell with this thing. And I can instantly feel a change of the vibe, the energy around me. I knew that something big had just occurred. And this spirit actually started to communicate to me in a very real way for the first time, in a nice way. I do remember it saying it was an old man that had died, and that it was also apologetic for what it did to me, that it was just, he was very angry and frustrated because he was trapped or stuck in a different realm, in our realm. And I actually ended up having to console it or him in those last moments. And I told it, now it's time for you to go to the light. It was a little bit scared, and I had to coax it or him as nicely and gently as I could that it was doing the right thing by going to the light. And then it went to the light, and it was over. After it left me, my immediate feeling was, wow, I'm free. I felt a little bit of peace, which was very welcome. And I knew when it was over, I knew it was over. I definitely felt more empowered, but the sense of freedom I remember most. It felt like that 900-pound gorilla fell off my back, and it was an amazing feeling. It's a good question to ask why I didn't get angry before, and I just don't know. I think it's probably because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to let go of the suffering that I was going through. And I think in life, people choose their own suffering. Whether it's unconscious or somewhere between unconscious and conscious, I think we do that. And I guess that's the suffering I chose, and when I was ready, I was ready.
Brad says he wasn't ready to let go of his suffering. Our expert Patty Allen thinks he may have lost his power to do so early on, perhaps during childhood. The paranormal, like ghost hunters, have to be emotionally grounded with strong boundaries. She says Brad had to develop those boundaries in order to have the power to get angry, and only then could he put an end to his torment.
It's difficult to say why something like that happens to a person. We all have our own paths, and I think that was part of my path. Ultimately, I would say to anyone, if they are very interested and they are actively pursuing or trying to experience these kinds of encounters, to be careful. It's okay to explore. That's an important part of life. But please be careful. You don't know what you may.
Of an aggressive spirit, but our experts go further than that, pushing the ice cream, smirking and backing down when she threatens to kick in the door. These are also the actions of a cowardly bully. Craig Brownlee tells a story of a ghost who is passive rather than aggressive, but that doesn't make it any less frightening, and Craig and his roommate are about to have their first taste of that fear. They get permission to camp out in an abandoned house while looking for a proper place to live.
I thought it was fantastic. It was generous. All of a sudden now we had instant place to stay. We didn't know what to expect. It was a shock when we got there because it was an abandoned, dilapidated little bungalow that was in rough shape, very rough. It seemed like wherever you walked in the house, this feeling of this is a strange place would sort of overwhelm you. It was a bit cold and chilly in there. You could see a lot of issues. The drywall was starting to go. The paint was peeling off the walls a little bit in places. There was a beam in the dining room that was coming right through the ceiling, and probably there was mold. I just can't fathom that that place would still be standing. I chose to sleep right underneath this collapsing beam. I don't know why I chose to sleep there, but something drew me to lay in that spot. And I was reading. I'm a wicked insomniac. So I remember putting my whatever it was I was reading down and shutting my eyes and trying to go to sleep. This noise in the kitchen. The best way I can describe it is shuffling. And I remember turning my head and looking into the entrance of the kitchen, and something's moving through the kitchen and is coming my way. I was laying in my spot underneath the collapsing beam, and I heard this noise in the kitchen. It seemed to be shuffling noises, and they were very clear, really clear to me. So I knew that it wasn't my roommate because I knew that I could hear him snoring. And the shuffling seemed to get louder, so I could tell something's moving through the kitchen and is coming my way. And I heard chains. They were dragging on the floor. I'm starting to get anxious. And then all of a sudden this image is at the doorway. No face, just black. It was a complete black silhouette, almost like triangular. It had a huge wide rim hat on, almost like a cowboy hat. Even though it was a black silhouette, it was vivid. It was clear as a bell. And it came right through the doorway, said, I'm just going to come in here, and as it came through the doorway, it vanished. It was gone. My breath was taken away. I was startled and stunned and shocked, and I jumped up and I walked to the kitchen and I looked on the floor to see if it had dropped anything, any kind of physical sign that it had been there. I saw nothing. And I went down the hall and woke my roommate up and told him about it, and he was very, very scared. He was shaking and saying, well, let's just go, let's go. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. And I said, well, it's no big deal. I just let you know. I'm freaked out. I want to talk about it. I want to tell somebody. You know, it was I've never experienced anything like that. It was extraordinary. It wasn't a ghost voice, and I can hear it as plain as you and I are talking right now. It was normal. It was matter of fact, is the best way to put it. I've retraced my steps about that a number of times. I wanted to finish his sentence. I'm going to come in here and have a bowl of cereal. I'm going to come in here and lay down and die. I'm going to come in here and what? I have no idea. I think that sleeping under the beam and the image coming through the kitchen was somehow connected. I don't know how though. I don't know how they can't be connected, because I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, and to sleep where I did and to see what I did certainly is strange. Again, it wasn't like it was threatening or anything, and because it said what it said so casually, it didn't freak me out. Certainly, my roommate was, because this guy was ultra sensitive to what happened, and it was a lot easier to scare him. There was no furniture in the house except for an old couch in what would have been the living room, and a big bear skin rug in the basement with the bear head on it. And the bear skin rug was right in the middle of the floor, which was creepy, really creepy. I saw it as a prop. I could use this to freak out my roommate. It's the only thing I saw about it. When he used to come home, I would turn the power out on the breaker panel, and wrap myself in that bearskin rug and then hide. And he would come in and be flicking on the lights and say, hello, hello, is anybody home? And I wouldn't be saying it. He'd say, I know you're here. And he was getting more and more scared all the time. And then I'd jump out from a closet or something and roaring like a bear with his bearskin rug on myself. Looking back, I'm horrified that I did that. I shouldn't have done that. You know, I saw how much he was so scared and shaking. I mean, I did apologize to him numerous times after that for what I did. It became a bigger deal after he saw that image. I was sitting on the couch and we were in this hysterical laughing fit over something. And, you know, he just kind of casually glanced down the hallway and he screamed. I just saw that thing you saw. And I said, what? I asked him to describe it. He described exactly what I saw. He said, it had the big hat on, there was no face. He said, I just saw it standing in the doorway. And said, we gotta get out of here. Like, we gotta go. You know, if he wanted to go and I knew how hard he was taking this thing, I was all for getting out of there. I got the feeling that it took advantage of the fact that we were vulnerable or sensitive to it. Certainly he was, because he was freaked out. I would tease anybody about that kind of thing ever again, and I never did, because I'm sensitive to that now. And I'm sorry for scaring him. And young and foolish, you know, I guess.
The phantom Craig talks about doesn't do anything. It's passive. But it still seems more terrifying than Rosanna's aggressive ghost. So frightening that two young men hightailed it out and found a new place to live. His roommate's fear is partly due to Craig's practical jokes. But Craig also may not understand the ghost in his story. He speculates it is taking advantage of their vulnerability. But our experts say it is the ghost and not the two roommates who is vulnerable. Traditionally, this would be called a prisoner ghost, trapped in the house and unable to move about freely. Passive or aggressive, it doesn't seem to matter. For Craig and Rosanna, both were scary, both made believers of their storytellers, and both ultimately became too much to live with.
Anywhere I go now, I think, you know, like there could be something in this place or about this place. Who knows what? Who knows what the reasons are? Who knows what it was? Who knows why these things happen like they do? But it's been with me ever since. So, you know, I wish I hadn't seen it, but it is what it is. I can't take it away or change it.
There are great ghost stories along the craggy coast and dark woods of the American Northeast. This one began a half a century ago, about a strange spirit that inhabits the landmark town hall in the village of Alton, New Hampshire. And it's still going. The witness list is impressive. The town's chief of police, the town planner, and oh yes, the town clerk. She's just one of several Alton town officials who refuse to enter their own town hall alone, and never after dark. The police station of Alton, New Hampshire was in the town hall basement. The chief, Thomas Mincewa, was on duty late at night when he heard it.
I heard noises and I came upstairs to investigate, and it sounded, because you could very distinctly tell front door closing and opening because it slammed, it was so heavy, and you could tell if somebody was walking in the hallway. And being downstairs, we would come upstairs to see who was in the building, because at the time the building upstairs was closed. And coming upstairs, you'd find no one.
Alton's town planner, Glenn McLean, is not the kind of man given to wild imagination. He's experienced it too.
You really start to feel like there's somebody right behind you. There are some physical things that happen. You feel your hair start to stand up on end. You feel that presence.
The local radio personality, Scott McKay, stayed in the town hall overnight. He thought to dispel the myth.
My impression coming in was one of skepticism, not too sure what I would find. I really didn't have a fixed thought on whether I believed in any supernatural or not. And when I left the next morning, I still wasn't too sure, but I do know that something happened.
And Alton's town historian, Judith Fry, is just about ready to include the ghost in official records.
I think it's happened too many times just to be a coincidence. And I think there's really some merit in it.
It usually happens sometime after midnight. And it continues until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. These are the hours of the Alton Town Hall ghost. By day, the old town hall is typical of any stately historic site you might find in a small town of New England. This one stands with town pride. Its 100th anniversary is coming up, and a celebration like Alton hasn't seen for many years is planned. Some townsfolk are wondering if the big event might stir something unexpected, even unwanted, in the old landmark. The people who live daily with the town hall ghost are certain about 2 things. It exists, and if you don't bother it, then it doesn't bother you. While the Alton Town Hall haunting seems unthreatening, no ghost story of recent times has had more credible or official witnesses. The people who believe it most fervently are the city officials and police. They live with it.
When you distinctly hear footsteps and you know them to be footsteps and hear the same type of noise and come up and not find anybody, check all the doors in the offices, find them all closed, and check the building and there's nobody there, makes you wonder.
There were a lot of times when things disappear. You go crazy looking for them because you're sure that they were where you left them. You look around, you can't find them, you come back, and they were where you left them. You start asking yourself some questions.
A lot of the city employees who work in the town hall by day refuse to enter the building alone, and never after dark.
Good morning. I survived the night at the Alton Town Hall.
The radio announcer, Scott McKay, thought he was going to make fun of the whole affair when he stayed alone in the building overnight.
When I left with the last employee. She was going off to a class. I was going out to get something to eat before I came back to settle in for the night.
You locked the doors.
Locked it up. I had supposedly the only key that I know of.
Lights were out.
Everything was turned off except the entrance light.
Yet when he returned, everything had changed.
When I came up to the room, all my stuff was gone. My whole gear, my sleeping bag, my knapsack. So I started looking around, came in this room here. Next thing I know, there it is in the judge's chair.
After finding his sleeping bag, he noticed his TV set was also gone.
After I retrieved my knapsack, I came over to the stairway here, and down at the bottom of the stairway was my monitor. Nothing wrong with it. It wasn't broken. It just looked like it had been placed down there.
All night long, he heard footsteps when no one was there, noises that no one was making, felt a presence that made his hair stand on end.
Even though I was lying here on the floor, supposedly alone in the building, something told me that I wasn't alone.
What he encountered was consistent with everything the police chief and his men had been quietly telling each other for years.
They would find lights on in the building as they drove past and turn around and come back to check them, and the lights would be out.
The sound of doors slamming has been a constant unexplained noise for anyone who stayed alone in the town hall after dark. The cell door in the old basement police station has been a sobering reminder that Alton's most famous building is never quite empty. And the dogs. The stories about the police dogs are what spooks the town planner Glenn McLean most of all.
The dog would want to respond to something upstairs. The officers on duty would take the dog upstairs and let the dog run. It would go down the main hall on the first floor of the building, hit the steps that lead to the second floor, go about 2 steps up and stop.
The question of whose spirit occupies the town hall has never been answered. One story is that a city elder responsible for the town clock long ago was killed in the tower. Another concerns a woman named Sarah Glidden. Like witches of old, she's buried beneath granite in the town cemetery. Some think her spirit has escaped.
In 1825, a lady by the name of Sarah Glidden, who was a resident of East Alton, was struck down on a clear day by lightning and was killed. This incident has been documented in the church record.
Whatever walks the corridors of Alton Town Hall at night, the townsfolk either don't want to know or don't want to disturb it.
I want to be on the record with the ghost as being respectful of it because I believe it is here.
With the town hall's big centennial celebration coming up, the people of Alton just hope the ghost enjoys a party. Julie Clark is an average girl, not prone to make up stories. But for a couple of years, country girl Julie has had to do battle with disbelievers. You see, back in 1990, these are the gentle sloping hills around Cranbeck, a little village nestling in the mountain ranges, some 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney. It's real rural Australia, a quiet place with just a main street, a pub, a post office, a general store, and not much else. It's where Julie Clark grew up. She's an independent soul, a country kid who learned to ride almost as soon as she could walk. Julie's now 15, and according to her mother, not the kind of girl who'd make up a monster story.
Julie's a very sensible girl and very trustworthy and pretty well liked around town.
For centuries, man has been fascinated by legendary monsters. The abominable snowman, first sighted by Europeans 160 years ago, Bigfoot in North America, and the Yowie, which has been reported more than 3,000 times from one end of Australia to the other. Through these cool green eyes, Julie Clark saw what she believes was a Yowie, a hairy human-like creature. It challenged her, chased her, and burnt an impression on her brain which is still as clear as any photograph. Julie is certain she's seen a creature from the unknown.
And some people, like, they don't even think, and, you know, they just laugh straight away and that. But I don't really take any notice because I know I've seen something and I don't see things.
It was a summer's day in 1990, a day that was to change Julie Clark's life. Julie's horse was the first to sense that something was wrong. It started to act up, snorting and rearing. Suddenly, Julie was faced with something unknown.
It was just looking at me, and then it just hopped up and started to come towards me. Yeah, it was sort of like a gorilla or something. And it was sort of like a huge man, but it had hair all over it. Well, I was just really shooken up, and then I just quickly turned the horse, and I just turned around and just bolted home and just never stopped. I just went flat out all the way. Its face was really ugly and hairy. When it went to stand up, it was, I don't know, it was heaps bigger than the horse.
Yeah, come on, come on.
It's true some were sceptical, but not Alwyn Richards. He's lived in the district for more than 40 years, and back in 1976, he saw something, a vision that still puzzles him.
It was quite, a real dark blacky brown colour, I suppose. Very woolly, very shaggy head. And the smell was a very stinking, more electrical sort of smell. And then like a, I don't know, sort of hard to describe, but a very stinking sort of smell, something that's not natural, not a natural animal smell that you'd normally smell around.
And Alwyn Richards isn't the only one. There's been another remarkably similar sighting, a sighting by a local businessman. He agreed to tell his story, but he did ask to remain anonymous.
All the grass was completely flattened, and there was like a circle of trees to make a good hiding place for something, but all the grass was totally flattened, and there was a very strong, like a burnt Bakelite electrical smell in there, and sort of sent shivers up my spine, and I hightailed it out of there too.
So, Julie Clark is not alone in seeing this beastly phenomenon, a phenomenon that no one around here can explain. Although the quiet surrounds of Cramback may look picture postcard perfect, there's one young girl growing up in this small rural community who believes with all her heart that there is a creature from the unknown somewhere in those hills.
Spirits. If you wish to join us, give us a sign. Knock 3 times if you are there.